Devorah, a brilliant Torah scholar. Devorah was a most gifted child, and her parents just adored her and absolutely lived for her. Her father began to teach her when she was still an infant, just 5 years of age. She made wonderful progress, and by the time she was 8, she was already learning Chumash and the prophets. When she was 10 years old, she had a thorough knowledge of the whole Tanakh and began to learn Mishnah and Shulchan Aruch. In addition, her father taught her to read and write the Polish language as well as mathematics. Shmuel Nachum would not entrust her education to any teacher. He preferred to supervise her studies himself. And well might he be proud of his pupil and his tutoring, for when she was 15 years of age, she was studying Gemara with Rashi. At the age of 18, she married a very fine young man, the son of a well-known and respected Jew in Minsk, and she was very happily married for 10 years, during which time her husband made a good living at his business. Devorah was a happy wife and mother. She felt she was a lucky woman indeed to have such a devoted husband and such lovely children, 2 daughters and 1 son. Then tragedy entered her life so completely that were it not for her great courage and brave spirit, she could never have come through as she did. Devorah's 2 daughters died during an epidemic among the children of the district, and to add to her full cup of sorrow, her husband became seriously ill, and he too died within the year. The poor widow with her orphan son made their way to her parents' home, but death seemed determined to remain on her track, for 3 years later, her only surviving child became sick and followed his 2 sisters to the grave. Another woman in her place would surely have lost her reason, for had she not lost practically everyone dear to her? For whom was she to live now? She tried so hard to hide her grief from her parents, for they were heartbroken because of her trouble. She therefore made herself appear calm whenever she was in their presence, and if she felt the strain was too much for her, she would go to her room and there give vent to her grief in a deluge of tears and sobbing. She was a wise woman and saw that she must pull herself together and see what she could do now to live a useful life and really justify her existence. She threw herself more than ever into her studies and into social welfare. She prayed to the Almighty to guide her aright and begged Him to grant her strength and wisdom to teach all she had been fortunate enough to learn from her father to her acquaintances in Minsk. Then she would not feel so lonesome and useless. Devorah had 2 friends of her childhood who also had studied the same as she, but they were not as brilliant as she was. Now the 3 of them, grown women, used to gather and study Torah together. They established study circles among the young Jewish women of Minsk and lectured to them on all the duties of a true daughter of Israel. These circles became so popular and spread so greatly that Devorah was kept very busy indeed, lecturing here, there, and everywhere. She was an excellent orator, and it was a delight to listen to her clear, stirring voice and to her lucid exposition. Devorah found great solace in her work, for in helping others, she at the same time stilled the dull pain in her aching heart. She was at this time studying the following 3 books: Job, Ecclesiastes, and Proverbs. In the book of Job, Devorah learned about God's judgment and punishment. Ecclesiastes showed her the vanity of the world and man's so-called pleasures. The book of Proverbs taught her the true spiritual way of life. These 3 books were known to her with all their commentaries, and she found that she could study them continuously and always find something new and worthwhile in them. Tzaddik Moshe soon came to admire this wonderful woman, so full of courage and enthusiasm for the welfare and progress of her fellow beings, putting away her own personal tragedies and associating herself with the hopes and ambitions of others. He felt that she would be the ideal partner for his master, the recluse Nachum, but how could he get these 2 together? 2 weeks prior to his leaving Minsk, Tzaddik Moshe broached the subject to his host, Devorah's father. He told Shmuel Nachum all about his master, what a splendid man he was, and in his opinion, how suitable a husband he would be for Devorah. He said he must naturally speak to Nachum first before the matter could be gone into, but as he was here, he thought he would like to hear what Shmuel Nachum thought of his suggestion. Shmuel Nachum was most interested, but said Devorah would have to be consulted before any proposition could be put before Nachum. When Devorah was approached in the matter, she was very sensible about it. She said she was interested to meet Nachum, as he sounded such a fine personality, but she could not be expected to commit herself as to whether or not she would want him as a husband before she had even seen him. It was agreed that nothing should be said about marriage, but that a meeting between Nachum and Devorah should be arranged. Tzedek Moshe was no great scholar, but he was sufficiently educated to follow the discussion between Devorah and her father, and he was lost in admiration for her scholarship. Thus it was that Tzaddik Moshe returned to Vitebsk full of enthusiasm about the idea of Nachum and Devorah getting together. He described Devorah to Nachum in such glowing terms that the latter agreed to make the trip to Minsk in order to become acquainted with this extraordinary woman. The visit was made, and Nachum and Devorah found each other very worthy. They became engaged, and very soon after were married. Tzedek Moshe suggested that Devorah should now take charge of her husband's affairs and accounts, and Nachum said he was in perfect agreement if Devorah wished it. He was only too pleased that it was not expected of him to spend his time on business matters. Devorah quickly proved to be an able businesswoman with a good head for figures, and above all, a great understanding of her employees. They all just loved her for her kind manner and interest in their welfare. Obviously, Devorah had the greatest respect and regard for Torah scholars, but in her contact with her fellow beings she made no distinction and treated everyone, scholar or otherwise, rich or poor, with respect and cordiality. Within a few months she had established herself as head of her husband's business, but apart from this, she had made a name for herself in the sphere of Jewish education among the men as well as the women, but naturally she concentrated her efforts more among the women, who had so much greater need of her. She had been so used to the women of Minsk being educated that the appalling ignorance displayed by the Vitebsk woman quite shocked her, but at the same time evoked in her a feeling of pity that they had for so long been so sadly neglected. Devorah determined to change this undesirable state of affairs as soon as possible, and set about arranging study circles for women in the same way as she had done in Minsk. She also called attention to the lack of institutions for looking after the sick and the needy, and gave a lead in their establishment and support. She was certainly kept busy and spent a very full life indeed. She was very happy at having such a wonderful husband, but felt that he lived too much apart from the world and its affairs, and that this was not right. She spoke to him one day about this, but he said mildly, "My dear wife, I am sure you are managing excellently without my help, so why bring me into these mundane affairs now? You know that I believe my duty to be to sit and study and pray, and there is no room in such a life for anything else." But Devorah was not satisfied to leave the matter at that, and began to bring examples of all the great Tanaim and Amoraim, who found time to look after their material interests as well as their spiritual ones. "Dear Nachum, surely you know that it is related in Tainus, page 9, about Rabbi Daniel Bar Katzina, who used to go into his garden every day to supervise the day's gardening program. Also remember that in Nedarim, page 62, we are told about Rabbi Ashi, who did business even with people who worshipped fire, explaining that this was not against the din. Devorah mentioned the case of many Tanaim and Amoraim who amassed fortunes or received them by inheritance, and wound up her arguments by quoting the saying of our sages that Torah without work ends in naught. But Nachum said his own great teacher, the Parish of Krakow, contended that the word work meant service to the Almighty. Nachum begged her to see that his way was the right one, and that he be permitted to continue his life as before. Devorah persisted, however, as she truly believed her husband ought to participate to some extent in more material things and live a more complete life. So she tackled him from another angle. "See now, do you know whether or not you are fulfilling the mitzvah of giving maaser for charity? You should look at your accounts, and only then can you know." Nachum had to admit that he had never done this before, but had just given charity in a haphazard manner. He protested, though, that it would take him more time than he could spare to arrive at the exact figure of maaser. Devorah assured him that she had the accounts in perfect order and completely up to date, and, with but a little effort, they could find out the amounts Nachum had paid out for charity since he inherited his father's fortune, and what the correct amount should have been. Nachum was not merely astonished to find that his wife was such a capable manager of his business affairs, but her extensive Torah knowledge astounded him. He began to realize more and more what a treasure he had in such a wife, and his respect and admiration for her increased enormously. Now that he had thought of her and her station in life, he realized also what a change her coming had made, not only in his own home, which had become a veritable open house and council of wise men, but in Vitebsk at large, where her influence was felt and appreciated in every sphere of social and educational activity. What he did not know was that Devorah found time every day to study the Talmud, and that she was already studying Shas for the second time.